Hi, this is Paul, and I know with the video that I released this morning, today is Saturday, that I said, well, not much will happen really at Synod until, well, Monday they'll start the plenary sessions again, and then Tuesday. Well, on Saturday, actually, they have worship and announcements, and I wasn't sure they were going to do too much on Saturday morning. Usually Saturday is the day that the bulk of Synod works on the plenary in their advisory committees. And again, I've explained how this before. It's really a very clever way to manage this massive agenda that Synod has. The agenda is broken down into advisory committees, and these advisory committees then sort of pre-chew all of the stuff that comes to Synod. And what actually hits the Synod floor isn't from that massive agenda book. It's from the advisory committees. And the advisory committees are just Synod broken up into smaller parts. Advisory committees are usually about 20 people around the room. It's often a very good sample of who is at Synod, which is really good, because what happens then is that for the most part, the recommendations of the advisory committees then carry on through, and Synod does better work. What we'll see later in Synod is that when there's something that comes to the floor, someone will want to amend or change the language in an advisory committee, and that's where things get sticky, because seldom when they try to edit on the floor, seldom do they improve what the advisory committee has actually managed to do, because it's a concentrated group of people who have spent more time looking on it, and at the same time, it's sort of they have some of the experts in the room from the area, let's say if it comes from a particular denominational office, and usually what the advisory committees do is do a good job of processing all that stuff. Again, you have a representative sample from the variety of delegates at Synod, and generally speaking, the advisory committee's recommendations go through. As I mentioned before, if an advisory committee can't come, it also works this way. If you're on an advisory committee, and basically what leaves the advisory committee, the whole committee has to agree on it. If you're on an advisory committee and you don't agree with what the advisory committee has done, you have two options. One is you keep your mouth shut on the Synod floor with respect to what has left the advisory committee, or you create a minority report. And the minority report then you find, if there are other dissenting members of your advisory committee that say we absolutely cannot agree with what the rest of the committee does, you have a minority report, and that's where you state what you have. Generally speaking, the majority report will pass. It has precedence. It comes to the floor first. On rare occasions, the majority report is tabled, and that's an indication that people want to see the minority report and get into it. The vast majority of times, the majority of report passes. And that's, again, because it's sort of a sample of the opinions represented in the body of Synod. So a lot of that work happens on Saturday. Most of the committees will get most of their work done in their advisory committees on Saturday. Monday, we'll begin to see some of these advisory committees surface, their reports surface. And those are the things that go to the Synod floor. And those are the things that are debated then and approved. And again, most of what the advisory committees bring to Synod will get approved, most of it fairly seamlessly. Now, a couple of things happened today that are important for probably where Synod is going to go. I didn't expect much to happen this morning, but this is the way Synod goes. You can't really predict how things are going to go. That's why you have the meetings. So they had worship, they had prayer, they had all that, and that's normal because then they all split off and go over into their advisory committees. But there's always a few announcements, and some of these announcements were significant.
Thank you all once again for being here. Thank you all for your diligent committee work, which mostly will be ongoing today. I have a series of announcements to make, some protocol stuff to make sure we're all clear on, and then we're going to do our balloting of people who need to be nominated or approved or affirmed for our various boards. Our General Secretary will bring us through that ballot. He'll tell you how to call that up and so forth.
Okay, what that is. The Christian Reformed Church, it's made up of local congregations, It's made up of classes and then the synod. The synod has a variety of agencies and boards that do the work of the denomination between synods. Everyone who serves on those agencies and boards of those agencies or officers, one of the things that we had to sort out last year at Synod was beneath some of these agencies are actually corporations, legal entities that have recognition. So the ecclesiastical stuff doesn't really have recognition with the United States or Canadian governments, but there are ways that they touch, such as donations, actions, and so there are actually legal corporations beneath some of these that sort of interface with the legal side of the United States and Canada. And those legal entities need boards, and those boards are derived from synod. But because the denomination has these classes, often there is classical representation on these boards and in those corporations. And so what happens is that the classes, there are a number of them throughout the United States and Canada, they nominate individuals to serve on these boards and corporations, and then Synod has to approve them. So this is an important legal step here. And in most cases, the delegates are not choosing between two names. They are just saying, yes, Synod has basically ratifying and agreeing to that Classis Central California has sent Paul Vanderclay to be on such and such board. Classis Thornapple Valley in Michigan has sent Paul DeVries to be on such and such board. And that's what happens with this ballot. And part of the reason they put it early in the agenda is that there's really no decisions that have to be made by Synod on this. Synod is basically trusting the classes and ratifying the decisions of the classes for the membership of the corporations and the boards.
But first, some announcements or comments that I need to make. For some reason, the 20-minute delay is not working today on our live cast. Does that mean everyone's getting it real time?
Oh, I should have watched it live. I would have had it live. Instead, I'm watching it now hours late.
Real time. Real time. Good morning. All right. So just a note on that. First, I'd like to request that if anyone at any time during our Synod meetings wants to voice a particular objection to a person, approach the officers before you do that on the floor. Because if we're ever going to talk about a single individual, a personal objection or concern that someone has, we want to do that in executive session. So before you go to the microphone and say, you know, I have this objection to this particular person, just give us a heads up, all right, so that we can sort of be prepared that that is coming.
That was a very interesting statement. Now, again, because of the actions of Synod 2022, some people will have questions about subscription and their legitimacy on the floor. And there was a little bit of that last year after the vote, basically a call to unseat the delegation from Classis Grand Rapids East because of their posture. That was voted down. And so what the executive has decided that if anybody wants to do that, they must first approach the executive, not do it from a microphone on the floor. So basically that will allow the executive to put Synod into executive session. What is executive session? Executive session means that the galleries are emptied and that the YouTube goes off and that they basically meet behind doors, closed doors. Generally speaking, in a Classis meeting, anyone who is an office bearer in the Christian Reformed Church may remain in executive session. Strict executive session would mean just the delegates. This happens sometimes at Synod if, again, there is a debate with respect to a person. It could be a church discipline issue. It could be a hiring issue. It's an issue that pertains to a person rather than an idea. And what the officers are saying is that it's legitimate for delegates to raise this kind of objection that Synod as a body will have to deal with, but you should let the officers know so that they can basically set up the situation so that this can be handled. So that's what that means. I've never heard that announcement. I don't recall, I'll say it this way, I don't recall ever hearing that announcement made, and that shows something of the tensions that are in this synod. But it would be normal practice in a classis meeting. It would be the same thing. You have officers that are helping run a classis meeting, and if something is of a personal nature, it is common practice to go into executive session to not have there be an audience or a gallery. So if this arises, it goes into executive session, and it's also the case that once it's in executive session, the members on the floor are bound by confidentiality. So in other words, you can't leave executive session and have everybody running outside to talk about what happened in executive session. So there'll be no commentary on what happens in executive session. That's the way that goes.
I have a number of anomalies with the seating of our delegates that I want to take us through just a moment. Lost my space here. Here we go. First, Classis BC Southeast delegated 2 ministers and 2 elders, as opposed to a minister, an elder, a deacon, and another. That was an honest mistake. It was a mix-up, and it wasn't caught by the synodical office in advance, so we had a bit of a quandary as to what to do. And the ruling that we have made is that Jason, one of the ministerial delegates, he will not be seated as a delegate because we want to stick with our rules. But we have invited him and welcomed him. Where are you, Jason? There you are. We've invited him to continue to sit at the table. He's at the committee meetings, but he won't be addressing Synod and he won't be voting anyway because he's not an official delegate.
So a few years ago, Synod changed the rules on delegations. The old rule used to be there were 2 ministers and 2 elders from each classis that would be delegated to Synod. A number of years ago, they changed the rules to 1 minister, 1 elder, 1 deacon, and then basically another delegate, could be a minister, an elder, or deacon, could be a commissioned pastor, who are technically sort of like elders. So this particular classis sent 2 ministers and 2 elders, and therefore violated the rules. The executive had to make a decision. They basically decided to unseat one of the ministers, and he will participate in the advisory committee, and he will be able to be there in the room, but he doesn't have voice and vote. And so that's how they addressed that issue. Now, again, if someone didn't like that, they could challenge the chair, and Synod could probably vote to overturn the executive's decisions and allow the person seated, but probably won't happen. We'll see.
We're sorry for the mix-up from the classis and sorry that the synodical office didn't catch it before, but we wanted to notify the body of that. We also have a unique situation from Classis Iacota. Their alternate, Wayne Klein, where are you, Wayne? Is here right now for these first 2 days. He's doing the committee work, and then he's going to be replaced by Matthew Hahn. There's a series of reasons for why it's working that way. It involves a wedding and it involves the desire, the very large desire for Matthew Hahn to be here. We had a bit of a quandary on this because we really want there to be continuity. We don't want classes to appoint one person for a couple of days and another person for a couple of days because of some conflict. We really want that continuity. But by way of exception, we're going to rule that this is fine. So Wayne is here now. Matt will be here on Monday to replace Wayne.
And again, this is the kind of decision that the executive team makes.
By Monday, we'll be done with the committee work, and then Matthew will continue. But I want to encourage all of you in classes to remember that this is not a normal procedure. So I want to caution you against sort of splitting your delegates in that fashion. So
Subsequent executive committees, if this becomes a habit, might do as he just did with respect to they did with respect to BC in terms of you might lose a delegate.
moving forward, that's what we hope. That's what we hope to do. Also, due to reasons beyond their reasonable control, we have a couple of delegates who will have to leave a little early. I know it's a little early to be thinking about leaving early on Thursday, but we do have a couple of delegates. Philip from Arizona. There you are. He's going to be leaving just a little bit early on Thursday, just so you know about that. And I lost my place here. Oh, from New Hope CRC. Oh no, that's not it. Don from North Cascade. Don, are you here? You'll also be leaving a little early. It involves plane fares and ridiculous expense and a missed booking, and then when it rebooked, all the details you don't need to know about, but thank you for your presence here, and you're certainly excused a little bit.
Synod and most classes have rules. They're enforced at Synod more or less. They're seldom enforced at classis meetings that delegates are not allowed to leave before the meeting adjourns without the permission of the chair. At classis meetings around the denomination, everyone's there at the beginning, and it just sort of slides off as the day goes as people, well, I got to be somewhere, I got to be somewhere, I got to be somewhere. But Synod's a little bit more formal on this account.
Early. Synod always has a couple of overtures or communications, or very often has overtures or communications that aren't quite processed appropriately, and then you have to make some judgment about how they are before us. So there's an unprocessed communication one. It's in the agenda from New Hope CRC. It's been admitted. It's legally before this body. There was also an unprocessed overture two from the councils of High River CRC, Covenant CRC, Calgary, Alberta, Noble Ford CRC, and Granham CRC. Those were ruled out of order and not legally before Synod. The ground for that is this. The overture was originally written to have implications only applying to their classes. An overture intended to have implications for the whole denomination would have had to have been substantially rewritten and first submitted to the classis and either approved or then sent on. So the ruling is that it is not legally before us. Are there any questions about those communications or about the seating of delegates?
And this kind of thing, a little bit more attention to it this year because there are so many overtures with respect to the decisions. But again, this is pretty standard stuff.
Or anything like that.
Yes. Where's the first thing that you said? The first thing that was admitted?
Communication number one.
Yes.
It's in the agenda.
Okay. Thank you.
At the end of the overtures. Go to the mic, Heather, please.
Your very first comment about some, I don't remember your wording, a complaint against the delegate or
If you're going to make a motion or a comment about a specific person and it's in the negative, you're either opposed to something they are personally doing, or you don't want them to be seated on something, or we ask you to approach us first before you do that, because we do not want to talk about individuals on the open floor of Synod. We usually go into executive session when we do that.
So in other words, we're always addressing motions or information. We're not talking about.
Correct, but if you're going to come up and make a motion about a specific individual, we ask you to approach us first so that we can know it's coming, so we can make a judgment.
So then they would go into executive session before that motion would be placed on the floor, because once it's placed on the floor, oh, this is a motion about Paul Vanderklay and his YouTube channel, and we think Synod should shut that sucker down. Before you make that motion, synodical delegates, you have to talk to the executive And they'll say, we're going into executive session to discuss a matter. And it all goes quiet. And then we need a motion to shut down Paul Vanderklay and his YouTube channel. That's the way it should go.
Judgment as to whether we should go into executive session. Otherwise, you get the mess where it's already on the floor and then you say, oh, whoa, 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 we should go into executive session.
I guess I'm confused by that, because does that ordinarily happen? I got an issue with the person and I want to make a motion about them?
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing Heather. I don't know about some of the rest of you. Is that Mike?
Maybe this is just irrelevant, but do we does this happen? Is this a thing that people come up and I want to make a complaint about a person and so I'm going to make a motion about them? Or?
It happens rarely,
Okay.
but it does occasionally happen.
And chances of it happening at this synod are extraordinarily high.
No, please, Heather, stay seated. Do not come up and make a motion about anyone. But it does happen rarely, and members of this body do have the right to make those sort of motions. We just want a heads up about it so that we can handle it appropriately. Harold, do you have a question? Remember to identify yourself and the classes you're from.
All right, Harold Caicedo, California South. One of the mandates that we have as a classes is to reflect the diversity when we are choosing the people to come to the synod. But I don't know if we are accomplishing this kind of thing, reflect the diversity in every classes when we are choosing the people coming to synod.
I'm not sure I'm understanding the question, Harold.
Okay, the mandate for the classes is when we are choosing people coming to synod, they have to reflect the diversity in the region. That's the thing that I'm trying to say. You know what I mean?
We
so
encourage.
I don't know if we are doing this kind of thing. I'm not sure about that.
You're not sure whether our
We are
delegation
reflecting the
Not all classes have the kind of diversity of classes Cal South.
reflect the
in
diversity.
this room.
Yes. Thank you for the comment, Harold, and it is true that we encourage classes to do their best to delegate diversity. Thank you for the reminder. Couple more things then before we get to the voting, running through the ballot. We are trying to be more intentional about embedding prayer into the work of Synod, and so here's the idea that we have. We would like every classes at your table sometime today or before Monday when we get doing our floor work in earnest, to have at least one person from your classes who is willing to pray. And at various times, the officers, myself or someone else, might just say, can a member of classes Thornapple Valley pray for us? And the idea is if we've already been through 6 speakers and we got 15 more, we might just take a moment to pray. Preachers, don't preach during your prayers. All right? They are meant to be just a prayer for God's blessings on the proceeding and peace and so forth. I say that to preachers because that's a notorious sin of us, of we who are preachers. So
this is not an unusual thing. It's something that's been growing in recent years where, and it's really a good practice because the debate gets going, emotions get hot, some people get, I should make a video. I just haven't had time to make a lot of videos. Besides the videos that I'm making, kayfabe and synod, because somebody mentioned, it's like monotony, then it's drama, then it's monotony, then it's drama. And sometimes in those drama sessions at if the chair is just noting the body sort of swelling up, it's a good time to sort of, okay, let's just calm everybody down. Let's just have a word of prayer. Let's redirect, and it just sort of helps the body continue to process things well.
One more, or a couple of more comments, actual. Richard, stop throwing things from on the podium.
So that's Richard Bodini. Richard Bodini was the second clerk, and Richard Bodini's a little bit of a clown. He's actually a Dutchman, but he's got an Italian name, and he serves a church up in Canada. He's on CRC Voices. He's got a great sense of humor, and he was throwing candy out into the tables. Now, when I go to Synod, I often bring toys. Why do I bring toys to Synod? I bring toys to Synod because of the tedium. And, it's nice to have some silly putty or just something. You're sitting there with the other people from classis, and it's sort of, there is a lot of monotony, and it sort of breaks it up, and it keeps things light. So I often bring toys, or I construct things, or I doodle, or it's a little at the Chino conference. Jonathan Peugeot, sometimes he looks like he's taking notes. He was doodling too, so sometimes people doodle. You get kind of bored in those chairs, and you're kind of sitting like this. You're in close quarters, and so you have to do something to sort of distract yourself. You can't sit when. It was funny earlier in Synod when the internet was there, and when they started using computers for voting. People were doing other things. There's YouTube or Facebook or something like that. They sort of shut all that down. You just do the work of Synod, but you got to do something. So Bodini's being a clown and doing that stuff.
That's cool. You might have heard me say yesterday that the galleries may be closed. When we talk about issues regarding human sexuality, particularly those issues of Committee 7 and 8. And that was because we had a recommendation to do so from the Program Committee. Remember, the Program Committee is the officers of last year's Synod. It also reflects what last year's Synod did. We're going to handle it a little differently. We are not going to close the gallery, nor are we going to shut off the live stream. We think transparency is important, but we are aware of the issues, and they're very real issues. A couple of them are, there's really not all that much room in this space for people.
So last year there were a couple of demonstrations, we'll just call them that happened in the parking lot. The gallery was closed. I originally thought, is that necessary? But when I thought about it, I thought, yeah, it was good. And then in Synod last year, I did think it was quite a good idea. There's a history so during the women in church office fight, at one Synod, everyone who wanted to show their support for the denomination changing its rules came in, if I recall correctly, wearing a rose on their lapel, something like that. And there were a variety of ways, even very subtle ways, that people will applaud from the gallery, people will gasp from the gallery. People's presence in the gallery is felt. Now, the Fine Arts Center has a much larger gallery space than the chapel does. The chapel really only sort of has this second area of wings around it, and I doubt they'll seat people in that choir section behind the organ. The chapel is set to basically have church in the round as much as possible. So if they do, well, they say they are going to let people into gallery. This could be significant because part of the difficulty is once they're in the gallery, and if stuff goes poorly, or if, again, I would think that if a delegate would say to the executive, I'm not feeling safe, or I'm feeling pressured, or, one way or another, then they decide to empty the gallery. Okay, then you pause Synod, and then the campus security has to come out there and get everybody out, and then close the doors, and people came in. And so last year they kept the live stream on, but they closed the gallery. And I thought that was the right decision. Now, that was a very controversial decision, but again, I tend to think people are going to come in, and one way or another, they are going to come in and desire to express themselves. And it's going to be really difficult for people to not express themselves from the gallery. And this is going to add drama to an already charged situation. Now, this is completely at the discretion of the executive committee at this point. And last year's executive committee was dominated by members of the Abide group. This year, I think only one, the vice president, is a member of the Abide group. So some people have said that this is more of a moderate executive committee. Maybe that gives us an indication that this synod will be a little bit more moderate than the more conservative synod, which was 2022. Hard to know yet. So this is going to be a controversial decision, just like last year's decision was a controversial decision.
But we will allow people to come and participate fully. Good decorum will need to be followed. If we hear of threats or intimidation being made by people in the galleries or people around the building, because presumably all of them might not be able to get in and find a seat, then we'll close the doors. But we'd like to try to have both the live streaming and the galleries be open. And so the officers will use their discretion. Calvin University is aware and will have people to help us with people flow and the rest, but that's the ruling of this body. So
people flow could be an issue in that building as well. And when they pull the camera back, you might see it. Again, it's sort of a church in the round thing. And the synod delegates, at least from what I can tell, pretty much fill up the main floor. And you kind of come in and then you go up into the gallery from the main floor. And there's not a lot of seating in that gallery. So this is going to be something to watch.
We were also made aware of abuses from unknown public persons in hallways and other public spaces during Synod 2022. So while transparency of synodical plenary sessions is valuable for everyone, it's important to note that the spiritual, emotional, and physical security of delegates, and by the way, all of our staff, is important. So if we have issues with that, we might need to change this, but we'd like to try to be baptized boys and girls together and behave redemptively with one another. So
he had given a little bit earlier in the video a little devotional that was with respect to baptism, and that's why that reference.
That's our ruling on that. We won't get there, of course, until next week at some time, but we wanted to make that clear. Jody Gilmore, where are you, Jody? Stand up.
All right, this is the Sergeant at Arms. Every year they have a Sergeant at Arms. Sometimes they give him a water pistol. Sometimes they give him a little stick or a crook or something. Basically, the job of the Sergeant at Arms is to get everybody out of coffee time and back onto the floor. They're basically a sheepdog for Synod. This is another little detail on negative votes.
Officers have also ruled that if requests to record a negative vote are received, the delegate's name, classes, and grounds will be read by the clerks, and only the name and the classes will be included in the minutes. I'm announcing this because our rules haven't always been clear on exactly how that goes. So if you record a negative vote, the clerks will read the negative vote, the classes, and the reason for that that you provide to them. That will happen either at the end of the session or sometimes at the beginning of the next session. Remember to record those negative votes after we voted, but within about 15 minutes so that we can get those together.
Now, the negative vote thing is interesting because it's designed to give a paper trail if there's desire for appeal or challenge or something in terms of that. From what I've seen, it's sort of become kind of a vanity plate issue where here's something that you really don't like and you want to let everybody know that you didn't like what Synod did. So you record your negative vote. And that's your right to record a negative vote. But you'll, as again with this Synod, as it gets going, there will be negative votes reported, and some bunch of people will be like, well, why are they recording? What happens with all of those negative votes? If you record your negative vote, does it count double? No, nothing like that at all. I've very seldom ever seen negative votes followed up on in subsequent things. It seems people want to make the point that they were against it. And so they get their negative vote recorded, and then they get their name, and then they get their grounds read to Synod. But again, there's a lot of tedium, so everybody's already rehashed the issue, so they sit and they read the negative vote, and on you go with life.
One more thing, and then we're going to, I think, go to balloting unless I miss something. And that is, Synod 2019 said that all floor speeches should stay to 3 minutes. We are going to honor that, but we're going to change the dynamics a little bit. We're going to remove the clock, so you won't see your 3 minutes counting down. We're simply going to...
There's a big clock on stage for your 3 minutes.
Keep the time up here, and we're going to try to be gracious with that. Our past... Thank you, Richard. Our past experience...
I already told you about Bodini. He'll show up in these videos. I'm going to let Richard know. He's getting named in my videos.
Experience has been that at least some delegates are intimidated by the clock counting down, and sometimes you're interrupted in the middle of a sentence. We're going to try to be a little more gracious.
I personally like the clock because I wanted to use all my 3 minutes, and it's kind of nice to know where you are. And so it'll be interesting to see what they do with this. I wouldn't be surprised if the clock comes back.
With the 3 minutes. But having said that, please do not stand up and say, I just want to echo. If you just want to echo, just sit down. It's already been said. Please refrain from making speeches to the gallery or to the people you know are listening online or to your classes back home. You're speaking to the chair and your fellow delegates, and you're trying to discern God's will for the purpose. So we are, as officers, going to try to keep us on point, speaking to the motion, and keeping our thoughts concise. So
And once this thing gets going, you can be the judge. I'm not going to play every speech on this. I'm only going to pluck out the speeches that I think are noteworthy for one reason or another. Basically, the way this works is patterns. You watch enough synods, you begin to see the patterns. You sort of know when things are happening, when something sort of either puts a pattern over the edge or breaks a pattern. And those tend to be the kinds of things I look for.
Turning the clock upside down doesn't mean we're not following Synod's rules. It means we want to lead with grace. It's a little bit like the open galleries. We'll lead with grace, but if we have to pick the clock back up, we will. All right, fair enough? That's how we hope to proceed through our meetings. Well, I've already taken enough of our time. We got a lot of committee work, so I'm going to turn it over to our General Secretary, and he'll go through our balloting process.
So at this point, he sets up the balloting process. But again, this is usually, they put this right at the beginning of Synod because generally speaking, there's nothing that's going to happen here. But this is not sort of your usual Synod. Now, I told you about the Dutch names.
We're going to vote yes or no for each of these nominees. And I'm going to tell you right now that I have not practiced enough the pronunciation of these names, so I'm just going to read them, and you're going to give me lots of grace.
Those darn Dutch names.
So Classis Arizona is Jeff Dykema. Classis BC Northwest is...
And these are for denominational boards. So now the camera's pulled back. This guy in the yellow shirt right under the 3 here, that's Bodini. That's Richard Bodini from Canada. He took down the clock. He's throwing candy. So Richard, you're getting honorable mention here on the commentary. And then this happened.
With our ballot. We have a speaker?
We have a speaker.
Okay.
Yes?
Mr. President, Lloyd Hemstreet, Classis Zealand. I was looking through these names last night, and most of them we can just approve and fly right through. But I think there are a couple of names on here.
And again, you'll recognize this guy. He's been on the channel. This is Lloyd. And And Lloyd and I had a long conversation about one of the more audacious overtures brought to Synod. And he said he's a Synod delegate. He's from Class of Zealand, and
situations that should be discussed further, and that would require us to go into executive session before the voting is completed on it. And so instead of using that time this morning.
So remember what we talked about with respect to executive session? Notice he didn't name any names, so he was following the rules, and that's really helpful. And Heather Strobosher's comment, this is exactly why the executive did what they did.
Morning, recognizing we got into the committee work late yesterday morning, recognizing that Committees 7 and 8 are going to be reporting back, and that will be directly related to.
Committees 7 and 8 are the two advisory committees that are going to handle a lot of the conflicted issues with respect to human sexuality report, gravamen, seating delegates, et cetera, et cetera. That's why you're going to hear Committee 7 and 8, Committee 7 and 8, Committee 7 and 8. They're also going to be the last committees that you're going to see whose advisory reports you're probably going to see come out.
A number of these names, or a couple of the names I have questions about. I would move that we table this voting until Committees 7 and 8 report to the body.
Okay, so now if you remember from the previous day, Classis Minn Kota, and you'll hear a lot. So Classis Minn Kota, Class of Zealand are two classes that are sort of, and you'll hear them a little bit later again too. They're sort of the, voicing some of the conservative concerns in the denomination. And yesterday, Classis Minn Kota tried to sort of change the way Synod was processing its stuff by pausing, by trying to forefront 7 and 8 with respect to some of these issues so that they could decide, potentially decide seating or unseating of delegates on the floor. That's a pretty dramatic thing, and Synod didn't want to go there. Now the argument is that what this normally perfunctory choosing of officers on boards and corporations, that this be paused because, let's say, from a particular class is unseated or disciplined by the denomination, their delegates will already have been chosen by Synod. So in other words, if you say, let's say Paul Vanderclay is from Classis Central California, and if you didn't want Paul Vanderclay on this board, the Paul Vanderclay would already be on this board unless you sort of stop the train here and say, this rather perfunctory thing, let's not have it be so perfunctory. Let's wait until we know what we're going to do with this classis and this church, or even this category of people, until we have decided that stuff. So.
All right, a motion has been made and supported to table. That's essentially to defer action until such time as Committees 7 and 8 report. Am I getting that right?
That's exactly correct. Yep.
There's no debate on a motion to table, and it cannot be.
Okay, these are synodical rules. Some motions are debatable, some motions are not debatable. And so motion to table, to defer action to a specific point in time, is not debatable. So Synod has to vote on it now.
Be amended. If you vote yes on this motion, there's no debate on a motion to table, and it cannot be amended. If you vote yes on this motion, it means that we're going to stop what we're doing right now, and we'll come back to it at a later time after we've discussed what comes from Committee 7 and 8. So a yes vote means we're done, we'll come back to it after 7 and 8. A no vote means we'll just continue on balloting. All right, the motion to table.
Could I ask for electronic voting?
And the request has been for electronic voting. We haven't even tested that yet, so here we go.
Here we go.
I will always honor a request for electronic voting if a member asks. Let's not ask too often, but if someone wants that. So,
Okay, what does this mean? They all have computer screens in front of them, and they're little buttons, little things that they can click on that mean yes or no. Now, you can vote multiple times, which everybody hears and says, what do you mean you can vote multiple times? But only the last time you vote counts. So why does he request electronic voting? Well, for something like this, let's say someone might feel a little bit of pressure from the other people that are their delegates from their classes. They don't know where sort of they all stand because, well, what's kind of behind this vote? Now, you've heard me say on the other things that you don't go to Synod and vote yes or no on some big issue. It's all these tiny little procedural votes, and you have to sort of, in your mind, figure out, well, what are the implications of this? And that adds tension to all of these moments. And so if, in fact, and that's why this vote is important, because depending on whether or not, and it might be true and it might not be true, everyone in the floor is already thinking about what Classis Zealand is thinking about. And sort of this, okay, again, think about Synod as a body. This body has a consciousness congress, and this consciousness congress is weighing all of this stuff. So Classis Zealand, Lloyd from Classis Zealand is saying, well, let's not post these people in the denominational boards if we're going to discipline a classis. So it would make sense to put this off later. There's no real compelling reason why this needs to happen now. And the reason the officers put it early was just because this is an easy thing to quick get done because you know you're all anxious about trying to get out of there at 3 p.m. on Thursday. So they're nervous about it and they want to try and get this all ready. So this is what they do. And what's interesting about this vote is if the motion to table is sustained, it might, and I will emphasize might, indicate later votes later on that there will be a desire to discipline that might involve, let's say, removing certain classes from seats at Synod. And then likely a motion would come that if your classis is not allowed at Synod, your nominees are not allowed on the boards, including the Council of Delegates. The Council of Delegates is sort of a board that meets between synods and does the business of Synod between synods, and there's one representative from each classis and some at large. So that's what's going on here, and that's what makes this vote interesting.
you're going to vote yes to table until 7 and 8 are done with their work. You're going to vote no if you want to continue with the voting. Go to your voting queue and vote yes or no. Is that up yet for them to do so? Yes, you can do that now at any time. Vote yes or no. Yes to table the balloting and the voting process. No if you want to continue.
And when you chair a meeting like this, you repeat yourself again and again and again because everybody's sort of distracted. They've got their computers, they're doing things, and it's like you want to just really set in them what they're voting. You don't want people afterwards to say, well, I didn't know what we were voting for.
It's right at the top. It's one across the top bar, the yes or no.
And you'll see people raise their hand. They're having difficulty with their voting. And here comes the tech guy. And I'll fast forward it because it takes time.
Please make sure everyone votes. And if you're having trouble voting, raise your hand.
Now on the screens up there, the votes are coming in and they're seeing the votes and they know how many votes people are eligible to vote and they know how many votes they need to win. And so they're just watching as it comes in and people are still probably struggling. This guy over here down near the right is helping this delegate with her machine to help her to vote. And again, they're all watching the screens and they're doing the math. And they're checking with each other up at the executive table. And yep, they're all agreeing.
All right, it looks like most nearly all votes are in and the motion to table passed. So the ballot is off the floor and will be considered later after Committee 7 and 8 report. The motion to table has passed.
Now again, that might mean nothing. Or it might give you an indication of the way that this synod is sort of shaping up and who's in the room and how are they feeling. and this is what I talk about in terms of sort of the establishment. I've been watching synods carefully for the last decade, longer than a decade, the last 20 years. And there's been things that would have been readily dismissed 10, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, even 10 years ago. We had COVID in there, so we missed a bunch of years. But now suddenly pass. And if you go back to my previous videos about why the Christian Reformed Church, unlike many people's expectations and assumptions on certain issues, the Christian Reformed Church is getting more conservative, this is an indication for me that this is happening. I think in years past, a motion like this would have been, we're not going to do anything. We're not going to change the status quo. We're not going to interrupt what everyone to go along to get along. We're not going to stop that. A vote like this says no. This motion from Classis Zeeland was taken seriously. It doesn't mean what will necessarily come down the road, but it may be an indication of sort of the mind of Synod at this point.
And I believe, unless I'm mistaken, that brings us to the end of our plenary session. There's only one more item that I have to do, and then I believe we have someone scheduled to pray to end the session, and then we'll go to committees. This also pertains to at least one overture that we have, but since those overtures haven't been processed yet, I have an announcement from Classis Minn Kota and an announcement from Classis Zeeland that were on their credentials that I am required to read. Classis Minn Kota and its delegates, both their regular delegates and alternates, by rule of Synod 2007, offer protest to the seating of women delegates to Synod for reasons of conscience. We wish to make clear that our protest is not against women or using their gifts in the church, recognizing that Synod has declared both egalitarian and complementarian positions as biblically faithful interpretations. We uphold the complementarian position, which states that men and women have different roles within the church. Classis Minn Kota and its delegates want to communicate how our consciences are provoked by the inherent difficulty in our denomination's local option in the fact that only the egalitarian position has been upheld and celebrated at Synod, our broadest assembly. Though under protest, we continue to participate because we love the CRCNA and seek God's blessing upon our denomination. The communication sent to this year's Synod offers fuller explanation of Classis Minn Kota's convictions. And from Classis Zeeland, Reverend Lloyd Hemstreet from Classis Zeeland protests the seat.
Okay, and Lloyd basically does the same thing. Okay, what's interesting about this? Make sure I'm right on here. If you remember back to the video where we had Sean Baker and the three other pastors from the CRC and me, and Sean made a comment about women in office. In 1995, the denomination opened all offices to women and had a procedure by which they would eventually be seated at many Classis meetings, not all, and they would be seated at Synod once a majority of Classis meetings, Classis open up open up the offices to women for those. This was designed to basically get this off of Synod's agenda, which it did. At this point, only about half of Christian Reformed churches have women serving as deacons. Only the numbers were given at Synod last year. It's something like 22% have women serving in the office of elder, and something like 13% have women serving in the office of minister of the word. So these churches are within their right to basically attach this to their credential. This sometimes happens at classis meetings. And it's interesting that all of Minn Kota has this with theirs, and Lloyd has this connected with his. Not all of Classis Zealand seem to have it connected with theirs. And if I get this wrong, other members of Classis Zealand will correct me, which is absolutely fine. I love to be corrected. It means I know more and I know the truth better. But this is, again, another artifact of the fact that even though Synod achieved a procedural and political compromise with respect to women in office, it did not settle the issue in the denomination. And so for many women, both who are on the floor and who listen to this on the live stream, this is an irritant. And they will complain, I feel unwelcome by the fact that this classis and this pastor is basically saying I shouldn't be a delegate. Similarly, many who are complementarians in the denomination, like these classes, say, it's an irritant. I feel like a second-class citizen because everybody else seems to believe it's okay and I don't, so now I'm the odd one out. One minister over lunch at last year's synod, I want to get him on. I want to get him on the show actually to talk about this because he made a great point and he made it very well to me. He now works in the denomination, so he might not want to come on YouTube and talk about this because you shouldn't endanger your job for my YouTube channel. But he made the point that a majority of the Christian Reformed Church feels like a minority in the Christian Reformed Church. One way or another, almost everybody comes to these meetings and says, I don't think I really belong. And when he said that, I thought, you're right. Everybody has some little aspect of their participation in this that makes them feel like a misfit. And I when he said it to me, light went on. I thought, you're exactly right. You're exactly right. And so this is one of these little points where suddenly the women feel, I'm really not welcome here. And the complementarians, okay, this is my point, but the fact that this is a point and there's tension in the room means this really isn't my house. And now there are lots of reasons to have and to feel that way. But this, even though, again, 25 years ago, the denomination made this decision, and this decision, well, ostensibly 25 years ago, the idea was, well, this will allow to test the spirits on this. But this came up in the video that I made with the clergy. You know, we'd like to discuss this for a long time. The irony was that after the denomination made this decision, discussions really stopped. It's now harder to have this discussion in the denomination because women feel like they're being disenfranchised. Complementarians feel like they're the odd ones out because the majority of the denomination has either made their peace with this or is in favor of it. And again, it looks like a binary thing, for and against, but makes your peace with it and in favor of it, those two groups together become a majority. And then the women over here and the complementarians over there, they both feel like they're on the outside. So these are the elements of this morning's synod meeting that I thought were important. So again, I didn't think there would be a lot. Now, tomorrow, unless something happens, and I don't think it will, but tomorrow, synod, they go to church in the morning, they go to church of their own choice, usually in the afternoon. There's an official synodical worship service that I assume will happen in the chapel. Last year's, it was in the chapel, and likely nothing will happen. Really, no business is attended to on Sunday. So in case something happens sort of outside of business, nothing really will happen until Monday. So, but a lot happened today, which is unusual because usually it's just sort of devotions, a few announcements, and off to your advisory committee meetings, and hopefully a bunch of you will get your work done. And so Monday there'll be some things for the agenda. Most of the things that come to the agenda Monday are pretty pro forma. They just things that you expect to pass. So again, I really appreciate the comments from the last video. I don't know if this kind of in-depth treatment is helpful or not. I have to apologize. I want to publicly apologize to the Abide guys, because the two guys who had made their little response video, I thought they were both delegates, and I was incorrect. And so I posted that on Twitter, and I posted that under the comment on their video, and I was wrong. So I want to, be clear that, when I make a mistake like that, I very much want to apologize. So this is what's going on. And again, if you find this helpful, just leave a comment that says, I find this helpful. Or if you have my email, everybody in the Christian Reformed Church that has a yearbook has my email address. So just let me know if this was helpful for you. Or if you want a way to anonymously say this is helpful for you, hit the little thumbs up. I never say hit the thumbs up, but hit the thumbs up on this video. And that lets the algorithm know that this was helpful to you. And then probably it'll serve up more of these videos to you in the future. So I plan to keep doing this again. I'm going to be out of town Wednesday and Thursday. I hope that the Wi-Fi at the place that I'm staying allows me to continue to do this. And if I can't, I'll be out of town for the graduation of my youngest son from college. Then I'll just have to catch up next week. So again, leave a comment. Let me know what you think.